sound speeds. And it's been a while since I've done a reaction video, so I thought I would look at the list of links that I have been sent from your fellow viewers and pull one at random to see what it is. Let's dive right into it. Pasting the link. Let's see what this is. Okay. Oh, I'm not going to watch an ad. Oh, that was the video. Okay, well, we're 1 second into the video already, so no reaction as of just yet. But this was a video called What is Timecode and How Does It Work with the Wireless Pro? Released on the Rode channel, which has 155,000 subscribers as of the time of this video, and it was released approximately 1 month ago on August 22nd, 2023, and currently has 25,255 views and 747 upvotes. I have no idea why I was sent this video to react to, so let's waste no more time and get right on into it. Hitting play.
One of the best new features of the Wireless Pro microphone system from Rode is its advanced timecode capability.
Okay, one thing comes to mind right now. In my deity BPTRX video, I analyzed the display to see if it was properly able to display 30 frames per second to accurately show us the time code. So I'm going to frame advance a little bit. 28, 27, 26, 24, 23. So this must be, no, it's set to 30 FPS. Okay, Rode is in a country, though, that only has 25 FPS. So their displays may be a little bit off. Let me see, real quick. Is Stats for Nerds, is this video playing back at 25 or 30 frames per second? So it's playing back at 25 frames per second. That explains why then. Okay, whoops. So that explains the reason why right now it looks like it's at 30.00 and I start to rewind. It goes to 28, 27, 26, then skips 25 to go to 24, 23, 20. That should be 22. See how it skips like once every 5 frames or so? That makes sense because their channel was recorded, I guess this video is recorded at 25 frames per second as opposed to 29.97 or 30 like we have here in America. So let's see.
Timecode capability. But what exactly is timecode? How does it work?
I wonder.
Most importantly, how is it useful for you? In this video, we're going...
Okay, now timecode may or may not be important for you. If you do any kind of a sync sound situation where you record sound separately, for example, like if you are recording video for a project and then you synchronize your sound to it as a separate, what's called a dual record system, where you record camera separately from your video, then you might need something like timecode in order to synchronize it. If you simply record your audio on your camera, you just run a cable to it or you hop to it, which means using some sort of a wireless system over from your recorder, from your audio system to your video recording system, then you don't need it because it's automatically synced up. So even when I do my videos here on SoundSpeeds and I have timecode devices, I don't use it. And the reason why is because I will simply clap 3 times, synchronize those into post, and that works great for me. On big shows and on a lot of, bigger channels and stuff like that where they use multiple cameras, it may come in handy because you have to sync multiple cameras to your audio, and sound is the department that generates the time code and then sends it out to the camera department. So in that situation, it would make sense because you're trying to sync all cameras to your sound recording. So that's the reason why you might use it, and those are a couple of reasons why you might not.
Going to lift the lid on the Wireless Pro's timecode feature and how it can help you stream.
Okay, let's pause real quick and look once again at the display. 3826. Okay, so now the top one here says it's between 27 and 28, and this says 28. So the display, you need to understand your gear. Sometimes it may not perfectly display, and there could be delays in the video processing, for example, that sometimes can happen. If you record in some sort of a RAW format and it's not doing any processing, it's just putting the raw image up on the screen, there's probably not a whole lot of processing that goes into making delays in the video. But if there is any sort of a delay when you take a quick picture, that may be because the display is not frame accurate. It could be a few frames off even sometimes. If there's a video feed going to monitors, sometimes I've seen directors say, why is sound delayed? Well, the sound isn't delayed. What you're hearing is accurate, like maybe 2 milliseconds delayed by the time it gets through the wireless system and gets to the whole recorder and gets back to your ears. That's nothing. 2 milliseconds is nothing. Maybe in reality it's closer to 5. But the video, which is hardlined, might be processed, and then it goes to Video Village and the director's monitors, DIT, that kind of thing. And they may be seeing the video with a delay. Now, video is light. light travels faster than sound. So a lot of the times what you'll see is people will think it's an audio delay because they're used to having audio delays. If you see something that is 1,000 feet away, or you see something that's 10 miles away, if you see that, it is happening instantaneously to your eyes. But if someone shoots a gun at 1,000 feet away, it could take a while for that sound to get through the air for you to hear it. A few seconds, actually, like almost 3 seconds. And if it's 10 miles away and you see a shuttle launch, for example, it could take a little while for that sound to get all the way to you. It's really weird because you're seeing it live and you'll feel the earth shaking later, but it's one of those things where if you've ever seen a shuttle launch, it's kind of weird because you don't hear the sound or anything like that until quite a bit later, even if you're far away. So it's something to be aware of when you're looking at your display, is that sometimes the processing of the video can take a few frames. It's just not able to happen frame accurately. So right now, it looks like 5, 6. The display is pretty accurate. I mean, it's a little bit off right here. It starts to drift a little bit, but it's more or less accurate. If you were to look at any one of these frames to try to determine if it's accurate, you would look at this and say, yeah, it should be accurate. So if you took a picture, like it looks like it's drifted to 16 and 15 there, but you go one more frame or a couple of frames and it's more or less accurate. So let's continue.
If you're a content creator, when it comes to post-production, you may have encountered sync issues. This is when your audio doesn't exactly line up with your video, making it look weird, like this. This is where Timecode comes in. Timecode is a media synchronization system that helps to ensure all your clips line up perfectly on your timeline.
Provided they're all digital. If you are recording in film or doing anything on an old analog recording system like SVHS or Hi8, something like that, if you're recording even sometimes even on older mini DV things, sometimes there can be, there's not going to be time code on those old cameras, even though it's recording digital. There's a certain thing that has to be done in recording the metadata to the camera. So many cameras this day and age do have time code, even the new GoPro Hero 12, 13, 14, whatever it is. I don't keep track of it. Even that camera, they're talking about time code on it. And many devices are starting to include time code because it's not that difficult to get a temperature compensated crystal oscillator that's accurate enough to put inside of one of those devices and make it worthwhile. So a lot of the times people are able to throw it into gear as a, wow, you should totally have this. And it's an additional feature.
Saving time and ensuring your content is always perfectly in sync. So how does it work and when can you use it? Sync issues are something you are most likely to experience if you record audio separately from your video.
Yeah, same thing I said before is if you're recording in a dual system. So you're recording your audio and you're recording your video, 2 separate departments for everything, as opposed to a videographer that records everything and then they just pull in a wireless microphone or two. As a matter of fact, that gives me a one of the little things I love saying, which is I would personally prefer to hire a sound person and have them do camera as well than hire a camera person and tell them to do sound as well. You're probably going to end up with better results.
Example, if you're using the Wireless Pro's onboard recording feature so that you can take advantage of its ultra high quality 32-bit float audio.
Okay, well, if you really want to use 32-bit floating point audio for your voice recording, fine, go at it. But it is totally not necessary. As a matter of fact, watch my video on 32-bit floating point right there, and I explain how it works and why it works. The thing I will point out here is that I am a big advocate for actually recording on a recorder anytime you can. Even if your device is a transmitter, I seriously am a believer in recording the audio on the actual device itself. If you have to choose between recording or transmitting and you are not going live, or people have to monitor it live or something like that, I would say it's better for you to record on the device as opposed to transmit. Every single video you've seen me do here on SoundSpeed, I have used a recorder to record my live directly. I have never once transmitted the audio over because once you go through the air, it transmits, it's at the mercy of whatever. Plus, I can plug straight into my audio recorder and listen to it and monitor it live. So anytime you see me wear my headphones and I have a lav mic on, that's me monitoring straight on my belt. Most of the time people don't do that when they're recording something like what she's doing right now, but that's what I'll do in content creation.
Audio. Using this feature will mean you always have a perfectly clean backup of your recording, but of course, this will mean you'll have to align the audio recorded onto the transmitter to your video in post-production.
That's a true statement. It's one of those things that you have to do the work of synchronizing in post. But here's the kicker. You're going to have to do that regardless. If you transmit over to a system like a sound recorder and you were recording it, you're going to have to take that recording and sync it up to your video anyway. Granted, your audio recorder, like a Sound Devices Mix Pre 6 or a Zoom F8N or something like that, F6, probably I should get with the program here and say newer things. Those will have timecode that makes it more easy for you to do. But if you're talking about an actual standalone recorder, not a lot of them do. More and more recorders that you would record are actually integrating in timecode now. So you're probably going to see that even more and more in the future.
There are several automated tools that can help with matching clips, but none of them are perfect. And often you can end up spending hours painstakingly nudging clips around on your timeline to get them to sync properly.
Okay, this is an accurate statement. It's something you should also be aware of too. Sometimes the audio inside your camera is not synced properly. And so if like on one of the cameras that I record a lot here on SoundSpeeds, if I record my audio on that camera, then it will actually, when I go into post, if I've clapped, I have to nudge the audio 6 frames forward. I have to audio, basically because the clap happens and you see that happen 6 frames before you hear it, which is about a 20th of a second in 30 frames per second. So a fifth of a frame, or a fifth of a second off. That's a huge amount. People are definitely going to hear and see claps differently when it's that far off. So if I ever use that camera, what I have to do, and this is Insta360 X3. If I ever use the Insta360 X3, mine is 6 frames off. So anytime I do it, I have to drag the audio, bring it forward 6 frames in order to have it synchronized with the video. So be aware that your camera, and even one of my mirrorless cameras, I think my G7, that camera, I think is like 2 frames or 3 frames off too. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've shot with it. Hey, if you want to buy it from me, contact me and let me know that you want to buy my mirrorless camera, and I'll probably sell it to you because I'd never use it.
This is where timecode becomes useful. Timecode essentially labels every clip the exact time it started. These timings are frame accurate, which means clips can be perfectly aligned even if your devices started or stopped recording at different times.
Okay, this is accurate. The thing that you have to be aware of with timecode is if you're recording on multiple devices at the same time, the timecode has to be synced not just with your camera, but with the other devices too. So if there's me, and let's just say that I'm talking up on the screen with this girl right now, which I am on the video that you're watching. If I'm going to have my audio that needs to be synchronized with her, both of our devices that are recording our audio have to be synced perfectly together. They have to be, both of the recorders have to be synced with the same time code. Then that time code has to be accurate to the camera as well. If it's not, you're going to have to recreate it all in post, and that means manually doing it anyway.
So if you started your audio recording after your video recording, when you add them to your edit.
So she's using DaVinci Resolve right now for this, which is a great program. I use it as a matter of fact. You can use auto-align clips based on timecode or by waveform. And there's a few systems that do it by waveform. I know DaVinci Resolve does. I know that CyberLink Power Director does, because I used to use that on this channel. And there's, I think Adobe Premiere does too. Or Adobe, what is the subscription service one? I don't even know because I don't use it. I don't think that personally subscribing to a service and paying monthly to be able to edit or something like that is a worthwhile feature unless you have people all over the world that are using it. Anyway, I'll leave my opinions out of this as much as I possibly can, but you do have the option to sync via timecode or sync based on waveform.
Timeline, they will snap into the correct position. This is because your software can accurately match the timecode of each clip.
And it does the exact same thing if you do it by waveform. Now, sometimes you record the audio on a camera with it all the way down. So if you have no meters, if you have no audio, there used to be something a few years ago that we called pluralize, where you could turn on a camera mic on all your cameras and you could use that to synchronize, but you have to have the audio recorded on the camera. In many modern cameras in the film world, you just disable the audio on those cameras because you're feeding it timecode and because you're recording separately on a dual system.
And ensure they have the correct offset. This is a huge time saver in post-production and is a standard in professional filmmaking.
That's correct. Is it a big saver of time? It can be. If there's a lot of clips and you're trying to align them real quickly, absolutely is. If you're a content creator and you're just going to go out in the field and record one take of something, probably not. You can synchronize one thing just as easily by going over there and saying align by waveform as opposed to align by timecode. The one thing is it has to scan the audio and then scan the other audio and then piece it together based on what it sees the waveforms to be.
But how does this work on the Wireless Pro? There are a number of different timecode modes you can use with the Wireless Pro, but in principle, they all work in the same way. You set the Wireless Pro to output a timecode signal. This is the code that represents the exact time and frame.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're using the Rode Wireless Pro system as a master timecode generator. There has to be something to create a master timecode. Many times it is based on a recording piece of equipment. So it's either a sound recorder of some sort, or sometimes you can get a completely separate timecode generator and feed that into the recorder. That way you always know that it's exactly accurate. That way if you feed it out and there's any latency at all that comes out of the standalone generator, that latency is going to be shared upon all devices that's connected to it. So what will sometimes happen is a mixer will get a separate timecode generator, they'll feed it into the recorder, then they're going to have extra outputs that go off and do different other things. Like for example, if there's someone that's for example, sometimes you'll have people that they'll have witness cams set up where they're going to be recording the same action that camera sees for VFX purposes. Witness cameras basically look at the camera as it's being recorded with the actors. They'll look at the environment. They'll see everything that they possibly can from set with a wide lens. And the post people will look at that and say, how far away was camera? How far away was this? And how high was it? And they can see everything on the witness cam. Witness cams have to be synced up with timecode as well. So sometimes some mixers that deal with witness cams will have a standalone timecode generator that feeds into everything. And that way everything will have the exact same 0.2 millisecond of a delay or whatever it happens to be.
You then need to ensure this is recorded to all your devices. The Wireless Pro receiver will automatically send the timecode to the transmitters so that the recordings on your transmitters will have timecode on them.
All right, the biggest kicker I'm always curious about, and I'm sure Rode has made sure this is not an issue, is there any latency on the devices that send timecode? Because if there's any device that can send timecode in the air, what is the latency on that? Some devices like wireless transmitters can have have like a 2 millisecond delay, 5 millisecond delay. DD Connect system had up to a 40 millisecond delay. So some systems can take a different amount in latency in the air than others. And I would fully expect Rode to have this implemented so that way it's minimal. Because you got to keep in mind that even that there's 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. And if you're talking about a 25 frame per second frame rate, which is what they're dealing with here, you're talking about 40 milliseconds creating 1 second, or 40 milliseconds creating 1/25 of a second, which is 1 frame. So as long as it doesn't drift more than technically probably half of that, like 20 milliseconds, it's probably going to be in sync with your camera. And even then, if it's 1 frame off, that's forgivable because you can at least do some testing and determine that you need to always shift back 1 second or something like that. It's a little annoying, but if your system has too much of a delay, the biggest thing is making sure it's consistent. If there is if the millisecond delay is like 4 milliseconds and then a few seconds later, it's going to be 12 milliseconds. And then it goes back to being, 3 milliseconds. And then it goes forward to 9 milliseconds and that it's constantly wavering. That could make 1 or 2 frames more or less, the size of the frames next to it. And that can start to wreak some havoc, if that makes any sense.
But you need to manually record the timecode onto your camera so that your video also has the timecode sync information.
Which is what I was saying before. Your audio, if whatever your master timecode generated signal is, your timecode has to be shared with all devices that need to be synced in post, which means camera and sound. If there's any sound sources that have to be pulled in from an extra source like playback, for example, the sound has to be pulled into the sound recordist, and there has to be time code generated for that audio being played back, so that way it can sync up with the recording of the actual track in post, and it has to be synced up with the audio recorded on set. So there's 2 time codes that need to be recorded by a sound mixer, one from their master time code generator and a separate one from an audio playback device and a playback operator.
There are several ways to do this, depending on the type of camera you have. I'll show you the simplest option, which is recording it via the audio input. The first thing to...
Okay, that is an option on prosumer and consumer systems. It is an option to have because the time code does make a squealing type sound. It makes a pulsing type sound. It's a digital sound. You can easily do that. But you have to make sure that your system that you use to pull the audio in later and to pull in and do your synchronization, you got to make sure that it has the ability to pull time code from an audio source. Not all of them can. If you're using DaVinci Resolve, for example, you can do it. I'm sure that Adobe's Premiere or Adobe's whatever the thing is too, since you pay a certain amount per month for it, I'm sure it can too. But not all programs can. So make sure that your program can do that before you start recording your audio, recording your time code onto one of your audio sources. Then say, why can't I synchronize it? That's why.
To ensure is that all your devices...
Especially because at that point, you're going to lose your ability to record your microphone. A lot of the times when you plug in a mic, you plug in an external device, you're actually shorting out the microphone input. So it's going to be like a low buzz, or it could just be, it could be your time code signal there, but you have no ability to hear the sound in post, and you have no way to sync it up unless you do it manually. So that's going to be problematic.
Devices are set to the same frame rate. This is important as timecode.
That is an important note, what she just got through saying. If you missed that, I'm going to take forever on this video, I know. But here's the thing. Every single camera you record on has to have the same frame rate. Otherwise, it's not going to match. And it has to also be in sync with the same frame rate from your master timecode generator and all timecode devices. If your master timecode generator, for example, is at 25 frames per second and your recorder is set to 30 frames per second or 29.97, they're not going to be in sync correctly. Nor will one of your cameras if it's set to 24 frames per second. It's not going to be in sync. Now, there's also drop frame and non-drop frame that you have to be aware of too. So if you're recording at like 29.97 frame rate, for example, then you could have NDF or DF. Drop frame means that if there is that one frame is basically removed, or it basically drops one frame on a schedule. Like every certain amount of time, it will drop one frame to keep everything perfectly in sync. If it's non-drop frame, it's going to not do that. So, and if you record one device that's NDF and one device that's DF, they're going to be drifted a few seconds if you go over an hour or something like that. That's an error that I made the mistake of back in the 90s.
Works by identifying the exact frame position of each video.
That was back when I was a videographer.
It's divided into 4 identifiers: hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. The wireless...
I didn't know what she meant by identifiers.
Time code.
Yeah,
the time code on...
A time of day is most often what people will use on set. And the reason why is because it matches the time you were recording. It makes sense for you to look at the time code and say, oh, it is like on the screen right now, it is 3:54 p.m. and 49 seconds. You could easily look at your watch or look at your phone and say, yeah, the time of day matches what's going on. If all of a sudden they go off speed, if the cameras go off speed and record for 2 hours at let's say 60 frames per second, if they synchronize, if they were to start, they change their sync back to regular frame rate, and then they start recording again. If it's not time of day, if you look up on the screen and say, wait a minute, the time code is 2 hours off, it's an indicator to you. It makes sense that you would look at it and say, that's not matching our time of day. Therefore, the camera needs to be rejammed. So that's one of the reasons why we use time of day. Sometimes time of day isn't what's used if you do music videos or something like that, where time code, the playback audio track, it has time code striped with it. That time code has to be then sent to the slates. So that way when they hold up the slate and then they slap the sticks and they show that, the playback signal, the playback of the audio recording would match the music being played back that's recorded on camera. So you have to transmit at that point the time code over to the camera. So when the camera records time code, it's going to be in sync with the audio later in post. That's why you would do that.
On your recordings will represent the actual time they were recorded. As I said earlier, it's really important to ensure that all your devices are set to the same frame rate, including the Wireless Pro.
Yeah.
So if you're
all of them need to be, otherwise it's not going to make any sense.
This is set on the Wireless Pro.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm going to back up a little bit because you saw real quick here. I'm frame advancing back and forth. You see this, how it says 2997 DF and 2997? The 2997 is non-drop frame. If it's intentionally saying drop frame, DF, that's the indicator. So if they say set to 2997, make sure they're all set to the same exact one, DF or NDF. That's very important. Otherwise, your audio is not going to be in sync with your camera.
On the Wireless Pro, your cameras, apps, and other recording gear. And watch out for other frame rates such as 23.98 or drop frame, as even a slight mismatch will cause issues later in post-production.
That's right. The time code is not smart enough to be able to determine that every second it should be synced up. So as soon as it rolls over and let's just say to 00 frames or 01, 02, whatever, it's not smart enough to say, well, 0 should be the same regardless of your frame rate. That's not going to drift. If your frame rate is 24 and then you have another camera that's 30, they're going to be in sync at the 0 frame. They're not going to be in sync by the time you get to 05, for example. One could be at 05, the other one could be at 06 or 07. So that's why it's important, because timecode does not understand. What it basically records is the timecode itself in metadata. It doesn't have the ability to only look at it once a second and synchronize it that way.
In this example, the mode you will need to set on the Wireless Pro is Mode 1.
I'll take your word for it. I'm not familiar with the Wireless Pro
as usual,
system.
Using the 3.5mm cable. What this mode will do is send the timecode into the camera on the right audio track and the audio from the transmitters into the left audio track. So how does this...
From the transmitters. So it basically sums together all the channels of audio into one channel. Now, back before we recorded on 788Ts and stuff like that in reality TV, we would have a standalone recorder. Or actually, it wasn't even a recorder back then. It was just a mixer. And we would mix usually a boom to one channel and the wireless microphones to another. And that's how we did it when we would have a tether over to the camera, recording 2 channels of audio on the camera. One was the boom, the other channels were the lavs. Now, the other thing that we sometimes would do is if there was like 2 lavs, for example, we didn't necessarily use the boom a lot. We'd pan one all the way to the right, one all the way to the left, and we would just have one, basically each channel being an isolated recording, and they could put it together in post. If we had more than 2 different audio channels, like three wires, for example, we would put the star on the left channel, the second star on the right channel, and then we would just try to bring up the other channel of whoever the third person was, the extra guest or something like that, on the same channel as the other guest. So if the host was on channel 1 and there was 2 guests on channels 2 and 3, we would pan both of those right so they'd be on the same channel. If you end up having 4 or more, then you'd end up having to pan according to either utilization, like if there's one person that's doing all the talking and everyone else is being asked questions, then you might end up separating them all on one channel as opposed to the host, which would be on another. There's different ways of doing it, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about a more modern approach, which is separate recordings. This is basically for a mix track, having an audio track that tells you in post what everything should basically be. So that way when you're watching the video, you can basically just listen to the left audio channel and hear all the people talking, or the right audio channel, however you want to do it.
This work, and how is the timecode sent over the audio output? It's encoded into an audio signal that sounds like this.
Yeah, there's that sound I was talking about before.
It can be quite loud, so watch out.
Some of the devices that you listen to, like the Denicky, outputs at like 0 dB. Extremely loud. I think the Deity, when I used the Deity BPTRX and the timecode devices, when I did the video on that, it was like at negative 20 dB, a lot less deafening. Comparing the two of them, no question, it doesn't need to be at 0 dB, but I understand why Denicky does it. They want you to hear it. But I tell you, you don't want to accidentally plug up to it, use your headphones, and be like blasted, into another county.
out if you are monitoring on headphones. You can switch your headphone monitoring to listen to the left channel to only hear the audio from the microphones.
Yeah, you need to do that to avoid hearing the timecode over the audio. That's, again, if you're listening to it on a camera or something like that. You're not going to synchronize it later.
Set the audio level.
You'll synchronize it later, rather.
In the usual way, and you are good to go. Your timecode will be recorded alongside both your video and audio recordings, keeping everything locked in sync. If you are using several cameras, you can jam sync them. This is where you use the Wireless Pro receiver as a master clock to sync the internal timecode generator on each camera.
Okay, there's a little bit of an issue with jam syncing. Okay, what jam syncing is if you take a timecode device, a master timecode generator, and then you put it in the camera and tell the camera to basically pull the timecode from this and then maintain it. Every single time power is lost to that camera, every single time someone goes off speed, anytime somebody does something to that camera, you'll have to re-jam because you'll lose your timecode most often. Sometimes there are cameras that will actually maintain the timecode because it has an internal, like a watch battery or internal little button style battery, and it can maintain that timecode. But if you don't ride the sync box on your camera, you could have all kinds of issues with drift. Now, these devices are so light that if camera says, well, I'm going Steadicam, I can't have your heavy timecode device on there. That's when you need to make sure you tell them, if you take this device off of your camera, you're going to have to, anytime you go off speed or something like that, you're going to be responsible for this because you will provide them timecode that goes straight into the camera. And if they just want to jam sync it, that's on them. They are responsible for that. And if they accept and by they, I mean camera department, if they accept the responsibility for that, fine, it's on them. But you need to make sure that as far as you are concerned, you are writing the timecode boxes. You will supply one timecode box for every camera unless there's a certain package deal. You say, I'm going to provide 3 of them included with my package deal. And they say, well, we're going to have a 5-camera day. Don't worry about, we'll just jam sync on the other 2 cameras. We don't want to rent 2 additional timecode boxes from you. And you're like, okay, fine. But they are responsible for that also. So it is, I don't want to say a bad practice, but it is a less desirable practice to jam sync your cameras. Simply because as soon as one of them goes off speed, if somebody changes a battery or something like that, they may forget to do. It could be in the 16th hour of the day, and everyone's just going crazy and trying to get through the day, and then someone doesn't look at the time code because they're like, just change out the battery and keep going. Or at that point, you can have all kinds of sync issues, so you don't want to end up doing that. It's a good idea to always ride your sync boxes.
Once set, the Wireless Pro can be disconnected from the camera. So what do you do when opening up your files in post-production?
Now, some cameras will have it set to regen, and then if you jam sync it, as soon as you remove it, it will start flashing timecode saying, hey, I got timecode before and I'm holding it right now, but I don't have it currently. It's flashing to let you know it's not there anymore. That's if it's set to regen. But you definitely want to, if you're going to jam it, your camera has to be set to jam sync. If it's most of the time, they're going to be set to regen because you just ride the timecode box.
First, you need to tell your video editing software that you're using timecode and that it's embedded into the audio track of your video file.
Again, using DaVinci Resolve here. This is you have to make sure your software is capable of doing this, and they should have told you not all software is capable of this. They may say it at the end, but they're using DaVinci Resolve for this. Even the free version does do this.
The exact way you do this will vary depending on the software you're using. We have
if it's even an option.
Downloadable user guides.
See, those are the ones that I'm familiar with. Premiere Pro, that's what it's called, and Final Cut Pro. So those are it basically gives you 3 examples there: DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, and Final Cut Pro. Those are 3 softwares. I know Cyberlink Power Director does not do it because that's one of the problems I ran into. I ended up having to use DaVinci Resolve a long time ago when I was doing the deity BPTRX video because it wasn't, or maybe it was. No, that was it, because I had to get it in sync with audio recorded. I didn't do my due diligence and double check to make sure Cyberlink Power Director could do that. So I had to use Premiere. I had to use Resolve. glad I did, because it's one of the things that pushed me into using Resolve consistently.
To explain this for all the major video editing platforms, so check out the links in the description below. The audio files from your Wireless Pro transmitters have the timecode embedded in them digitally, so there's no additional audio track. Your software should automatically recognize this when you put the clips onto your timeline. Timecode is a total lifesaver. No more time wasted struggling to get your audio and video in sync, making—
I mean, it can be. It can be. It's not always a time saver. Again, it depends on your workflow. A lot of the times, see, one of the big issues that I run into with companies like Deity and Rode that are pushing timecode down people's throats is the same thing as with 32-bit floating point. It's like, oh, you should totally be using this and telling people you need to use this. This is a feature you need to use. Here's the fact of the matter is you don't need to. If I'm doing content creation right now, I don't need to use it. I don't need to use 32-bit floating point. I don't need to use most of the stuff that these companies are basically advertising as features that you should need and you do need. I mean, it's like, to me, it's extremely irritating that all we want is a few basic features. I miss the days when I could walk over to a camera and actually flip a switch to change something, flip over the filters manually, lay a hand on a device and press the buttons, flip a switch, that kind of thing. This day and age, go into the menu and do this and this, and then there's a firmware update, and then it's like, well, I go back in, I'm like, where's the feature? And then I can't find it. I have to go back to the menu because no longer is it under settings. Now it's under a separate feature called audio, and that was an issue we ran into with one of the Arri cameras a few years ago, where they decided to do a firmware update. It used to be that everything pertaining to audio was underneath the audio, so if you hit the audio button, timecode was under there, and so then you could adjust your audio levels, you could set your fan noise and all that kind of stuff. And then one of them, then they changed an update, and all of a sudden fans were put not under audio, it was put under settings or under setup or something like that, and timecode was under setup or settings, and they just changed everything. So all of a sudden we were like, where do we go into the menu? How do we change this? And so we had to go through the whole menu on the camera to try to figure out where they had put it, because they did a firmware update. If you have an actual device that has switches on there, they can't do a firmware update and flip the switches and something like that. Actually, there's one exception that I know of, and that's when they use software or firmware assigning to certain buttons. Like, for example, on the new Deity Slate, there's a switch on the side that you can either use to flip and invert the display, or you can set it to other things as well. So, some devices will have certain buttons you can use that will be user assigned, but not always. Timecode is one of those things where as long as you synchronize it with a clap, you're fine. And for most of the time, most people that are using these devices, like even the Wireless Pro here, I can't imagine you needing to have timecode if you just run one camera. But if you use multiple cameras, then it may be a time saver to you.
Making editing much easier and more efficient. There's more information about using timecode on our website, with user guides and descriptions for the other Wireless Pro timecode modes to suit different types of setups.
So
check those out.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a good video. I mean, it's at least, it explains as a very bare basic of certain things. The only real thing that I think catches my eye on this is about jam syncing. Make sure you are very aware of what jam syncing on your cameras means. Because if you jam sync your cameras and they're set to regen, or you go a high speed, or you do anything that's off frame rate, or your timecode isn't exactly in sync with your or your timecode is drifting or something like that, just because of your settings, like the NDF or DF that I was talking about before, it can make a big deal. And in that case, having your audio that is a consistent 48,000 samples per second in post, and then you can take on all your different cameras that are at different frame rates and say synchronize by waveform, they're going to synchronize just fine. If you try to do it via timecode and your cameras weren't set correctly to your master timecode, it's going to be off. So you just got to be aware of what you're dealing with, and some cameras don't have all the same frame rates that other cameras do. So you have to be aware of what you're doing. So thank you for tuning this episode of Sound Speeds, and be sure to tune in the future for more reaction videos, more information, and as always, sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.